So thank you very much for joining this talk about our Aim Higher programme. The Aim Higher programme is about applying to competitive universities, including Oxbridge and of course veterinary medicine and dentistry. And the reason why we have a talk early on in year 12 to launch this programme, which really kind of takes off in January, is because applying to competitive university is a long game. However, there will be lots more talks about the UCAS and applying to university and student finance and supporting students in actually making applications and choosing their university choices in the kind of March and going into early summer when the new UCAS kind of cycle opens and students are beginning to think about going to open days and really understanding the importance of their mocks as well in terms of getting those predicted grades and therefore deciding their universities according to those predicted grades. So this talk is very much an introduction to that. So I'm just going to share my screen with this talk. So the different things we're going to be talking about this evening are what the institutions are looking for, but also who are or what are these competitive universities and what makes them different. What support is on offer thanks to the Aim Higher programme and also our progression to HE teams and also the wider careers and teaching staff support that is available as well. What students can really be doing from now to build both the academic and the kind of professional profile as well, because as we know, university these days and getting a kind of graduate position after that isn't just about the university degree, it is the wider kind of profile as well. And then the middle bit will be Oxbridge, what makes Oxbridge different, but specifically focusing on what the expectations are in terms of applying to Oxbridge. And then the final part is the introduction to medicine, dentistry and vet med. And again, this is very much just an overview because the actual Aim Higher programme is very much about looking at all of these different aspects in detail for the students in the programme of different talks and events that starts in January. So, oops, sorry, wrong way. So what support is available? So at Abbeygate, we have David Pulford, our progression to HE advisor, and he's on the future zone and the second floor. And at 1, we have Holly Wimpress, but also myself very much dealing with the kind of Aim Higher programme at Abbeygate 1, and also supported fantastically by Ryan Clark for the West Suffolk College Aim Higher programme, which is slightly different because it is a little bit more tailored to kind of individual needs within particular courses. And then overseeing everything is Nadine Payne, who is the head of futures across the group, and she is still also very much involved with Aim Higher because she's a scientist, so she does help support with personal statements for the vet med and dentistry and medicine applicants as well, and all of those mock interviews. So coming to see us for any of that support in terms of choosing the right course, university, drafting personal statements, UCAS applications is all in that one-stop kind of either through booking appointments or just dropping in or attending the regular programme of talks which are presented by the team across the colleges. So as part of the Futures team, we also have the work experience, so the Group Enrichment Officer, Kim Birchley. She can advise in building up the professional experience that might be needed more for whether it's vet med and dentistry or deciding to go into banking or doing a more kind of vocational course like economics or law. Kim can absolutely support in helping, as I said, building that kind of bank of work experience and encouraging the reflection on that, which is so important, not just for applying for those vocational universities, but increasingly for degree apprenticeships as well, or even apprenticeships as such. And if students really don't have a clue what they want to do yet, Maria Austin and Maggie Noonan and the team over at 1 overseeing that, Becky Herbert, and head of that Charlotte Warren as well. But these are your key people to really kind of think about it. And I've just noticed there's a typo. I haven't given Maria's email address, but as you can see, it's just the first name and the surname, which gives you that information. And booking an appointment can also be done if you consult the Futures Fortnightly that goes out, or even the websites under the careers pages. You will be able to book an appointment through the links on those sites. So the AIMPire programme is kind of split into two parts. The sub part is the Health Hub, but the Oxford, Cambridge, but also competitive universities are part of the main programme, and Health Hub is, as you can see, the healthcare related. And it does say medicine, but within that we have, of course, got diagnostic radiology, midwifery, paramedic science, any of those kind of more occupational therapy, any of those more competitive kind of healthcare courses fall under that Health Hub, and we support all the students in doing those courses with interviews and a kind of more competitive application process as part of that. So what is a competitive university? Traditionally, they might have been thought as Russell Group. So Russell Group universities, there's 24 of them. They are perhaps the older universities, but they are self-nominated as the Russell Group because of their world-leading research, their outstanding teaching and learning. They also, perhaps because they are more established, have very good links with business and industry and the kind of wider or more international academic world. They perhaps have a higher spending per student than other UK universities because they have slightly deeper pockets. Of course, that depends on the particular courses, but most importantly, they have very competitive courses, although each university, of course, has its specializations, and it's important to do the research into your particular universities to see if they are the leaders in their particular field. And one way of doing that, of course, is looking at university league tables. But of course, later in the year, we will be looking at the value of those university league tables. And as I said, choosing a course is part of the advice we give as part of the AIMPire programme and to all students. So other universities, however, have very highly sought after courses or specializations. Of course, they're the conservatoires, particularly for classical music and even drama, even opera at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. And then other kind of universities that are really coming to the fore now, Loughborough, as we all know, for sports science and particularly psychology, and Bath for accounting and finance, business management. So absolutely looking at your particular, at the kind of subject leaders and choosing universities according to that, rather than perhaps choosing your university and then seeing whether their course is kind of good in your subject. So as competitive as Oxbridge are Imperial, so they also particularly interview for their science subjects, and they really are, because you are absolutely competing internationally with these three as well as Oxbridge. You really do have to have a very, very strong academic application. LSE, London School of Economics as well, and St Andrews, I think they take about 25% of American students now, as well as a huge, of course, percentage of Scottish students. So they are potentially as competitive as Oxbridge. Edinburgh also very competitive and give kind of decisions much later, partly because, of course, Scottish universities provide free degrees to their students, so therefore they naturally have a higher percentage of Scottish students applying to Scottish universities. But if you are considering Edinburgh, Glasgow, also very good, it's important to consider that the courses are 4 years, and the first 2 years are often less specialised. And while your degree might be called a master's, it is still an undergraduate degree. Science courses, you still come out with a BSc, but just bear in mind it is 4 years. However, for most kind of English and Welsh universities, a 4-year course, unless you're doing a languages course or some other courses, might have, for example, might be an integrated master's, and that's particularly for STEM subjects. So it means you do an additional year in order to achieve, you do actually have a valued master's at the end of it. Equally, a lot of universities are now offering a BA or a BSc within a placement year, and that placement year is often, incredibly valuable these days because it is giving you that head start in terms of work experience. You're using those kind of industry links that were already established by the universities, and you should be getting a lot of support from the universities to set up your placements. You do still have to pay a certain amount of fees to the university for nominal administration, and you will also still need to pay your maintenance, but you do get your loan for that maintenance. So it is perhaps a slightly less kind of financial risk than leaving university, particularly if you haven't got lovely parents to go home and kind of live with while you are job searching. So it is a good way to kind of get on the kind of professional ladder, but still having that chance to have access to the loan, although of course it is a loan, and as we know, the maintenance loan doesn't always cover, in fact often doesn't cover the whole cost of living and accommodation, etc., while you are doing your degree. Finally, a 4-year course, a year abroad, and that isn't just for languages courses. Students on film, for example, in Newcastle, one has just spent here a year in Australia, another doing theatre, has just come back from Canada, etc. So honestly, a lot of the courses are now offering that year abroad, and not just Europe, could be very much further afield as well. So US universities, we do have experience, thank goodness, within the team, thanks to Nadine Payne's daughter who's actually studying in America, and also sports scholarships. She is able to offer that expertise, and we have organizations, agents who we feel confident in recommending if that is something you are interested in applying for as well. However, remember that US university courses are much broader initially, so you probably wouldn't be specializing until, again, your 2nd or 3rd year. However, that does mean there's more flexibility and you're able to change direction within your degree as well. However, you wouldn't be eligible for the UK student loan finance, although, as I said, there are sports scholarships and other scholarships available. But of course, the more competitive the university, the harder that is. And also in terms of building your academic and other kind of profile, you would need to have much more emphasis on extracurricular and community activities than you would for applying for a competitive university in the UK. So in terms of the UCAS university application, there are a number of ingredients. One is your academic record, and that goes back to GCSEs. But your GCSEs are very much considered in relation to the schools, the high school you went to. So the universities are very good with keeping up to date with where high schools are in terms of, I won't say league tables, but in terms of the progress and the area in which they are and their results. So a student's GCSE results are seen within that context. The other part of the academic record is, of course, your predicted grades, and your UCAS predicted grades are already quite optimistic and positive because they really are meant to show what you are capable in terms of your A levels based on your current performance, but also in terms of if everything goes well on the day, so to speak. So your UCAS predictions will vie slightly on the kind of more positive side of it, although of course the STEM subjects, it very much more is on your performance to date academically, whereas humanities subjects you perhaps have slightly more leeway because you haven't quite mastered the essay techniques or answering the kind of exam criteria when you do your mocks, so there's more kind of leeway perhaps. So your personal statement is very much kind of in 3 parts these days, but it is very much on your academic kind of profile record, but also your exploration beyond your subject. And that's part of the AIM Higher programme, is to support students in exploring beyond their subjects. The personal statement is effectively one side of an A4 typed document, and so that is where you need to condense all your wonderful academic kind of achievements, and it is very much kind of academic. Your extracurriculars are kind of banished to some extent to the bottom, unless you are doing a vocational course, in which case all of that work experience, not work experience, those extracurriculars that might be related to your course are important. Finally, not quite finally, your reference. So that's your teacher's reference. And as I'm going to explain, we are being asked to be far more factual these days in terms of the reference that teachers give. And we principally write those at the end of year 12, which is why it is important to start investing right from now in terms of proving to your teachers you have that academic ability, self-discipline, fascination for your subject, etc. So the contextual information is also important, as I explained, when students are considering the academic record, but also if there are any extenuating circumstances which might have affected your academic performance, there is a chance, and we absolutely encourage students to talk to their PPTs about that information, because that is an important part of the application that we send off to UCAS. So being aware if there's been ill health, kind of serious family issues that might have affected particularly GCSE and A-level years, it's important to that is included. But also where you live, if it's an area of less progression to HE, then that is also, for example, taken into consideration. And finally, just a reminder that ultimately you make 5 choices, and we recommend 2 kind of aspirational choices, 2 realistic, so very much chosen in line with your predicted grades, and then 1 kind of backup option. And then in May, before you go in September, October, you narrow that down to 2. So it's 1 insurance offer and then 1 firm offer. So it's your kind of wish list university. However, I should say that last year, most of the students at Abbeygate, and in fact nearly all, did get their first choice, their firm choice, even if they did drop 1 or 2 grades, because there is recognition that UCAS grades are perhaps slightly more positive, and also the kind of landscape in terms of the number of places at university at the moment did kind of play in that year, but might not necessarily kind of come into play every year, particularly as there's a population surge for this year group or this age group coming up. So autumn so just to kind of run through the timetable. So year 12 is when the kind of subject exploration beyond the curriculum should really begin, partly kind of thinking about planning how to make the most of your holidays and your summer holidays, but also taking advantage of kind of taster sessions that might be offered by universities, trips which are offered by the college, for example, summer schools, and kind of other those kind of lectures that might be taking place online, or even kind of exploring kind of YouTube. We give all of that advice, and we try and share as many opportunities as we can through the Aim Higher kind of Teams page, to encourage students to kind of take up those valuable opportunities. As I explained, for vocational work course, work experience also is absolutely key, trying to make the use of year 12 to do that, because once you've started in year 13, your personal statement is pretty much kind of just needs to be written, so that, and you're already thinking about your you very much are focused on your year 13 mocks and the kind of academic, and students do find the kind of beginning of year 13 quite stressful as the kind of reality kicks in, so having everything under your belt by then is important. Year 12 in the kind of summer is when we kind of really think about course choice in university research, because it's open day season. We also organise visits, for example, to the UCAS Discovery Day at University of Suffolk, and we kind of provide that additional support in starting the UCAS application as well. And then for some competitive universities, the summer holidays might be revising and preparing for admissions tests, which I'm going to go on to talking about. And we also encourage students to really think about their personal statement over the summer as well, particularly for some of those, of course, medicine and Oxbridge, which are early entry, which I explain. Whoops, the light's just gone off. apologies, we have motion sensors with the lights as part of the sustainability in the building. And then year 13 is when students come back. So the beginning of the autumn term is very much reviewing those personal statements. And with UCAS, that's really, with early entry, that absolutely kicks in, because the 15th of October is the deadline for Oxbridge and the medicine, dentistry and veterinary courses, not nursing or any of those other healthcare professions, but those three more competitive ones, absolutely. And then the additional assessments, which I'm going to talk about, also come in early, kind of the autumn term. Interview prep for those courses we've kind of explained already. Also for some childcare education, teacher training related courses, all of those do often need interview as well, and we provide that support. And then finally, we have an internal UCAS deadline on the 27th of November, which I'm sure you will be aware is earlier than the January the 14th or 15th that UCAS declare, and that's because we are absolutely checking every application before it gets sent off, and that's over 500 at Abbeygate, maybe more, and even more than that at one as well. So to ensure that we are able to do that properly and guarantee that they will then be in for the 14th or 15th of January, that's why we make that deadline earlier. So what support is on offer through the Aim Higher programme? So workshops and presentations from particular kind of industry or academics, and that's very much that could be lunchtime, but we're also working with the subject areas as well to ensure that kind of Russell Group or wider universities are coming in and maybe doing taster sessions within the subject areas. We have guest speakers. We have guest speakers coming in. We are extremely lucky, for example, to have Virginia Planas, who is an NHS strategic partnership leader, advisor within the Eastern Education Group, and she's absolutely key to the support we're able to give to students considering kind of healthcare pathways. We also have links with St Catherine's in Cambridge and Balliol in Oxford. Each Oxbridge College is linked to a particular area, so that's why we have those good partnerships with St Cat's and Balliol, and our two advisors there are fantastic about giving talks, arranging our visit to St Cat's each year, coming in, giving personal statement support, and yeah, we're very grateful to them. And of course, the one-to-one appointments available throughout the year are absolutely key to supporting students in making the right choices and preparing their applications. And then finally, on the Teams page, which will be set up once students are all signed up, and students can sign up either by actually volunteering themselves. We also make sure that we do talk to subject teachers to make sure that we haven't missed any really talented students, and we were also looking at data to again make sure we haven't missed any students. However, we do encourage them to sign up because it's a sign that they are taking the initiative and they're already kind of committing to doing what is necessary to present a very kind of successful application. So the kind of talks that we set up at both One and Abbeygate are getting universities in, or they provide online talks in the lunch hour, such as, for example, University of Exeter might do an introduction to kind of similar to what I'm doing this evening, but much more kind of focused, applying to competitive universities and why go to a competitive university. University of Oxford would be exploring supercurricular activities, but how to respond to those activities and how to kind of reflect on them and make the most of them. And we kind of build on that as well to show them how important it is to have that kind of information ready and building up that kind of profile, ready to write their personal statement or do an interview. University of Sheffield, University of Durham, for example, might be kind of other aspects of the application process. And then University of Cambridge, nearer the time, might give an interview skills workshop. So that gives you a sense of what is in store starting in January or February and going on into the summer term. The Health Hub is a slightly kind of more different one, and I will kind of look at this in a bit more detail when we get to that section of the talk. But it's very much supporting the students in the different aspects of building that application, because it does have slightly different requirements, whether it's veterinary medicine or actual medicine and dentistry. But it might be looking at the different roles within healthcare, the different attributes that are needed, finding work experience, medical work experience, also ensuring that you're keeping those important reflections is key. And then finally, we've just had, for example, our mock interview sessions with students looking at the different kind of assessments within the medic and dentistry and even veterinary, the kind of quite rigorous different assessments that they do these days, with different kind of activities to look at different cognitive or personal qualities. So that's that gives you a sense again of what we set up for the students. And finally, degree apprenticeships, that's built into the support with apprenticeships, because all apprenticeships, when you're looking kind of at some of the bigger companies, are getting more and more competitive. But degree apprenticeships, so they might have the same kind of assessment criteria, but degree apprenticeships taking up another level. And so the Empowered program is very much looking and supporting students with those particularly competitive positions. And as I said, degree apprenticeships are getting increasingly competitive, but they are very much in specific kind of industries. So engineering, you can see them on the screen, biosciences, defense, digital technology, and banking and finance are kind of key sectors. But just to give you a sense of one of the talks, for example, is with companies present. So they talk through the kind of opportunities that are available, the assessment, what they're looking for. So do look out for details of the Empowered program, and the Aim Higher students and students in general, of course, received that kind of information. So back to what students can start doing now. So building these kind of super curricular kind of academic profile, absolutely kind of deciding which area they love and pursuing it beyond the curriculum. In the personal statement, they do not necessarily want to know, universities, what you are being taught. They want you to prove that you've explored the subject beyond your A-level teaching, because you're going to be spending 3 or 4 years literally doing that. You'll have the teaching, of course, but it will be encouraging you to kind of be independent in your academic interests. So 2 of the great kind of resources for finding kind of things you could be doing are these 2 links here, and of course this PowerPoint will be available alongside this video. So Oxford and Cambridge have on their website under each subject a list which is then categorized under their kind of particular subject areas of things you might like to go and do and explore. But finding what you enjoy doing is the key. So these are just introductions for you to go off and kind of explore a little bit further. So to give you kind of some idea, of course, there are kind of podcasts. So in our time on Radio 4, there's kind of a different topic each week. If you're interested in history, of course, TED Talks are interesting, and I know that students particularly like those and enjoy those. All in the Mind, again, on Radio 4 is really good for mental health. So just trying to explore kind of podcasts and also YouTube videos. There are some very good online lectures and talks as part of on YouTube in particular subject areas. And universities also have fantastic resources and taster sessions on their websites for you to explore. Open Learn and the Open University and MOOC, of course, provide fantastic courses, and even SpringPod and UCAS have amazing ideas and work experience taster sessions on their website, all of which are free. Finally, essay competitions is a really good one because you are absolutely showing the academic interests and all of those skills which universities are looking for. And again, it's a great thing to talk about in your personal statement to really show that you've got that get up and go that initiative, that self-motivation to, as well as that academic prowess, to absolutely pursue your subject and create enter one of these competitions. And we try and make available these opportunities that are coming up as much as possible through the Aim Higher programme and the Teams page. So looking out for some of those essay competitions is really great. There are some that kind of run over the summer, but often it's the kind of spring to summer of year 12 that you really should be thinking about trying to enter at least, I would suggest one essay competition. And there are essay competitions, particularly, although science, of course, you have the Olympiads. So the maths, biology, chemistry. Olympiads are a good way of also showing your academic kind of prowess beyond the curriculum. Just in terms of other kind of resources that are available, I've mentioned the Aim Higher Teams page, but the Futures Fortnightly. Also, if you look at the HE Progression to HE page, we will try and post opportunities, but also the Empower page at the end, and even the careers. If you're thinking about degree apprenticeships and more vocational courses, looking at those pages and looking at the opportunities listed on there is important. And of course, UCAS Hub, I've already mentioned, and university websites, absolutely key to finding opportunities for those particular subject areas and universities. However, it is the grades that count. Okay, it's quite a big transition step up from GCSE to A-level. So this is why it's happening slightly towards the end of the autumn term, when students have had a chance to kind of find their feet, but they now need to kind of think about kind of really going up and investing as much as they can in their academic grades in order to ensure that they have got the predictions at the end of year 12 to enable them to open as many doors as possible in terms of competitive universities. Because the competitive courses, one way of judging whether it's a very competitive course, and that means respected by employers and really also you'll be going to be with other kind of candidates who are absolutely going to thrive off and in terms of kind of academic achievement is to look at the grade entry level and the offers that are being given. That is the best way to decide whether it is a really valued course. So making sure that you have those grades to keep those doors open is really important. Begin to research if you are thinking about Oxbridge or law or some of those other courses. You begin to start thinking about the timelines and deadlines for particular assessments. Yes, we will absolutely do our best to publicise that as much as possible. But if you consider how many different courses and subjects are available at university and how many university courses there are and how many students there are, of course, trying to cover all bases is tricky. So taking personal responsibility for that is important. Keeping notes on what you have done and read and watched or listened to outside of your subjects is important, and looking out, as I said, for those opportunities that we will be posting or hopefully you'll discover is important. And if you are thinking about a competitive course where you might have an interview, already get used to talking about what you've read or discovered, such as going to the Psychology Society, or there's a Maths Society, or debating, making sure you're going to those extra enrichment activities is key to being able to do that. So admissions test is not just for Oxbridge, although or for medicine and dentistry. Other subjects and other competitive universities do ask you to take those admissions tests. So if you're looking at an engineering or STEM course, absolutely check your university and check your course to see whether they might require the ESAT. So the ESAT is usually taken in kind of mid-October. Along at the same time is the TAMUA. So that's often for maths, computer science and economics courses at competitive universities. Again, universities kind of change the goalpost slightly each year, so we absolutely advise you to look at your particular course and check the requirements. The LNAT is a law assessment. It's meant to be more on cognitive kind of abilities, and it is it's not every university. Again, it's particular ones, so Durham, Bristol, London, King's College, UCL, I'm not going to promise that was not all of them, but those are the main ones. So absolutely, and London School of Economics and Warwick, I think, also require it. So absolutely checking your particular course to see whether you require it is important. Some universities are now thinking about bringing in other admissions tests, perhaps to combat AI. So UCL, for a lot of its humanity courses, is now asking for the TARA, which is a thinking skills. So again, it's meant to test your cognitive abilities rather than what you know. And then finally, the UCAT, I will explain later, is for medicine and dentistry. And again, you need to really take that by the 15th of October because it's one of the early entry ones. But we do not run the tests here. They are farmed out to, I think it's Pearson, by most of the universities. So you need to absolutely take responsibility yourself for booking those courses. Where possible, we will put calendar invites into students, to remind them that the booking is open. And the reason why you want to book it early is because the book, the choice of assessment center and the time at which you might do it kind of narrows as further down the line. So trying to book that in early is important. Sorry, no chance for questions. However, if there are questions, please do feel free to email me, and I will absolutely try and get back to you, or one of the team will get back to you with that information at any point. So please do not hesitate to get in touch. So that was the end of the kind of first part in applying to competitive universities, but absolutely your young person will be very much receiving far more information as part of the AIM Higher programme. So moving on to Oxbridge. So what makes it different? In terms of globally, we know that it's right at the top, even if the 3 or 4 universities, MIT, etc., they slightly shift positions from year to year, and most of the subjects top, the league rankings, particularly in terms of the research and student experience. They have amazing facilities. For example, Oxford has just opened its, I might be making up this number, 200 million pound humanities building, certainly very, very well endowed humanities building in Oxford, but each college, of course, has its own kind of historic library, amazing science labs and research equipment, and funding. They are the most well-funded universities in the country, so that automatically gives certain privileges, shall we say, quality of teaching. However, do check the courses, and I will just go on to that shortly. But what really makes it different is the teaching and learning style, and you really need to consider, if you're thinking of applying, if it's the teaching style to which you are suited, because the interview is very much also seeing whether you are suited to that particular style of teaching. So you will have normal lectures like every other university, but the seminars will be far, far smaller, and you will also have 2 to 3 other students in tutorials for each of your kind of units that you've chosen each year. So you'd have a tutorial 2 or 3 times a week, probably, with your academics, and that's very much might be reviewing an essay you've been given for that week, or a problem sheet in the STEM subjects, and the academics want to enjoy teaching you, so you have to be able to discuss your subject and feel comfortable discussing your subject in that kind of environment. So it does mean it is quite intense as well, because your workload is perhaps far more than it would be in other universities, particularly if you're doing humanities subjects. You might have far less contact time and essay marking in other universities. But on top of that, it's only an 8-week term. So your workload's already increased, but it's also shrunk. Can't think of the word, telescoped into those kind of 8 weeks. So it can be quite intense. However, it is, the most wonderful experience, the most, wonderful intellectual kind of challenge, and also being with so many other kind of wonderful young people all sharing the same passion for learning. It is, and there are so many other kind of societies, and it's work hard, play hard in the Oxbridge system. So it is fantastic. However, you need to be able to kind of balance the kind of academic rigor and pressures that it kind of also brings. So the colleges, some people think they can kind of game the system. The college you apply to really shouldn't affect your chances of success these days, because both Oxford and Cambridge operate a pool system. The Oxford one is perhaps, sorry, lights again. The Oxford one is perhaps slightly more successful because they absolutely consider the applications across the departments far more. As I said, collaboration within the departments in terms of looking at applications. However, Cambridge also has a very effective system. So if you apply for an open application, or even if you apply for a university where they happen to have very strong candidates in your subject in that year, if they think you are a strong candidate, colleges will be coming to look at their that pool before they go ahead and give an offer to a weaker candidate. So please rest assured that choosing your college should be absolutely because you really enjoy the surroundings, or the accommodation even, or its position, or lots of other kind of factors, rather than because you think it's going to increase your chances of getting in. And your teaching in your subjects will be very much in the department areas, but then you'll be having a lot of these tutorials back within your college, and your social life will be very much kind of more orientated perhaps around your college, and each college does have its own identity. So Oxbridge is very much for everybody these days. This just gives you a sense of the figures for Oxford last year. I think Cambridge is even higher in terms of the proportion of students from state schools that it welcomes. A proportion of free school meal students, for example, 8%, and this kind of reflects that the application again is considered holistically. So taking your GCSE results in comparison to your school is very important. Where you live, whether it's a private or state school, all of those are really key, and their welfare and their support is absolutely fantastic these days, partly because it is based on the college system as well as the university. So you've got a two-tier system or parallel system in terms of welfare, and sense support, which is absolutely critical. And as we can see, nearly 20%, for example, declare a disability now. So that support is very well honed in Oxbridge. So in terms of access and making that opportunity available to everybody, it is fantastic. However, a bit more kind of information. So if you, the other thing is that you aren't really working in term time because it's so intense, it's only 8 weeks, is perhaps frowned upon. I wouldn't say it's banned, but it's definitely frowned upon. So they do make sure that there's additional support for students from low-income households. And as you can see, these can be worth up to £6,000 a year, and even more if you're estranged from your family. And Cambridge, I must have taken out the Cambridge one is pretty similar as well. So in terms of the course choices, just a couple of things to be aware. Cambridge does not offer biology, chemistry and physics separately. Instead, it offers natural sciences. So you apply on biology, but you'll need biology and chemistry usually, or physics, in which case you might need physics and chemistry and maths. And then you kind of choose your kind of pathway later, so either biological or physical pathway. Oxford offers PPE, which is politics, philosophy and economics. Cambridge does not. There would be more history and politics if you were going to choose that, or just politics by itself, or the interesting course, human, social and political sciences could perhaps be seen as the kind of nearest equivalent, although it doesn't have the same economic component, or indeed philosophy actually, but it's a kind of Cambridge's own equivalent of PPE. Also, medicine at Oxford and Cambridge is very much more heavily research-based. So the interview is also very much more on science, knowledge and research. And it's 6 years because it's intercalated, which means there's a year studying another subject, a completely different subject. It could be a completely different subject. So do take that into account, so that you do come out a kind of very kind of rounded person at the end. And it also means that when you go onto the ward for the first time in 3rd year or even 4th year, you do have that really strong scientific knowledge because you spent the first 2 years in the lab and the lecture theatre rather than going anywhere near a patient. There are some interesting kind of course pairings as well. For example, computer science and philosophy, or another kind of interesting courses, materials science at Oxford, or you've just got a new course at Cambridge, which is design, which is bringing together engineering and the more kind of creative aspect of design and technology. So do kind of have a look at some of the kind of more interesting courses. I also think human sciences, if you're interested in biology, anthropology, sociology, and geography. That's a really one. It's more about the evolution of humankind. So another interesting kind of quirky course, and of course the Anglo-Saxon, Norse, and Celtic studies, if you are interested in that as well. So a double honours means that you choose 2 subjects, which might be making your application harder because you need to be accepted by both departments. However, if you are particularly strong, say in computer science, but the philosophy department aren't particularly keen, you would still be able to be offered a place for computer science, but they wouldn't offer you the double honours with it. Finally, if you have had factors affecting your education, but you still like the idea of applying to Cambridge or indeed Oxford, there are their foundation programs. Of course, they are very competitive, but more than that, they absolutely look at your contextual factors and whether to award you a place, as well, of course, as your academic kind of potential. But there are, kind of that route in, but it is very much if you have had those factors that have affected your education. Kind of other things that make the application different. You will have to submit written work. Usually that's work that has been done as part of your normal subject teaching. So absolutely investing in those all through year 12 is incredibly important. The application deadline is the 15th of October, but our internal deadline again will be the 7th of October, and we will be very strict about that because we absolutely do want to make sure that you have everything covered and perfected before well in advance of the 15th of October deadline. There's even more extensive subject exploration because whereas you might only need kind of 2 or 3 interesting kind of subject exploration examples for your personal statement, you will be absolutely expected to discuss those in depth and show that you've even gone beyond what you've put in your personal statement at interview. And finally, the interview, as I said, is finding whether you are not just academically strong what you know, but also how you think. So you do have to have that something special. I've always said that, my English teaching, I kind of be spotted kind of in year 7, year 8, those who are likely to be Oxbridge candidates, because yes, there might be academically strong in terms of grades, but they've just got that something else that just has set them apart in terms of that intellectual curiosity, intellectual capacity and ability, just taking them a little bit further than other people. And then the admissions tests, I kind of have explained in terms of those key subjects, but Oxford has its own admissions tests, and these aren't just also kind of thinking cognitive ones. They do expect you to have really strong foundations in your subjects, whether it's for the maths, the modern languages, for example. I know that you have to have a very strong, they say you don't have to have very strong grammatical knowledge these days, but it's still pretty tough assessment. And then some of them, of course, are the TSA, the thinking skills assessment, is perhaps meant to be not testing knowledge, more kind of approaches, but you still have to be very kind of intellectually strong to succeed in those admissions tests. So that is just another one of the kind of pillars that they use to decide what you do. However, Cambridge University, again, some colleges might have their own tests. So I'm recording this on the 18th of November, for example, and today was some of the colleges had their English essay assessment today for those applicants. So what are they looking for? Consistent academic excellence. This does include GCSEs, because although they expect you to be something special, they have to be able to see you can absolutely juggle all of those academic kind of requirements as much as possible. However, of course, if there are extenuating circumstances for your GCSEs, or you've been particularly strong in those subjects you've gone on to study and you're applying on, there is some leeway, but they do still expect to see a strong academic performance. Subject-specific A-levels, of course, if you're doing natural sciences, yes, of course, the particular STEM subjects that they want is important. They do also want 3 A-levels, although the Abbeygate Criminology has apparently been accepted for law, but while other competitive universities absolutely do it, accept BTECs, Oxbridge are more strict in their entrance requirements. And the ability to meet the minimum offers, so for STEM, that would be 2 A stars and an A, Humanities A star AA, which is the same as Durham for subjects, but just because you're able to, perhaps you've got an A star AA for Durham, where my daughter went to, for example, but I know that she was absolutely not an Oxbridge candidate. So having that extra kind of academic rigor, passion, curiosity, and really strong academic performance and love of studying is important. So this is just an example of the references which we are now expected to give. So for example, X is in the top 5% of a strong cohort of 80 students. X has achieved 80% in 2/3 of their over 80% in 2/3 of their assessments, or they've performed top of their cohort in 50% of assessments. So yes, you might be very strong academically, but they are expecting you to see that you are the top of your cohort, or very near the top anyway, and we will be expected to give that kind of those statistics to strengthen your application. And just to give you an idea, those are the minimum offers, and they are quite standard offers across their subjects. This is an indicative slide. If you kind of think I'm being quite kind of harsh in kind of highlighting the kind of academic rigors, it is because students that they have let in who haven't quite achieved their prediction, for example, they really struggle. They absolutely struggle at Oxbridge. Even if they do manage to get in, it is a struggle, and that's why I am kind of being quite kind of realistic in terms of the expectations for these grades. So these are the achieved grades, not the predicted ones. And we see that 45%, just over 45% of the students who were admitted achieved 3 A stars or better. So we can see how the students perhaps have been kind of weeded out through the different kind of application process. So yes, even if you do get an offer, you may well not make your offer, which is of course a huge shame. So that just gives you a sense of the academic achievement that you do need to be aiming for. And again, just in terms of realistic expectations, the STEM subjects, particularly maths and computer science, are incredibly competitive, partly because you're up against a lot of kind of Far Eastern students, international students as well. So while you might not have the language to apply in humanities as an international student, the kind of more the STEM subjects, that kind of slight advantage you might have falls by the wayside. So for example, we see 7% success rate for computer science at Cambridge, and in Oxford, slightly different measures. Just explain there are 10 applicants per place for mathematics, and if you imagine that most mathematics applicants will have 2 A stars or be predicted 2 A stars for their maths and further maths, and probably in physics as well. So I hope that gives you a kind of sense of just what you are up against, and which is why I'm being kind of quite brutal in explaining the academic achievements you need to have. But of course, applications are absolutely considered holistically. So academic record, teacher's reference, the contextual data, as I've explained already, the admissions test, the written work you submit, the interviews, and to some extent weeding things out, although we might put a huge amount of emphasis on this in terms of the students, because it's the way of showing your absolute what you've done. So capturing that interest and attention, that's why the personal statement is important, to kind of try and kind of catch their attention, so you don't at least go in the no pile before they've given you a chance to look at everything else. Okay, so I don't know why that's there. That's the Cambridge bursary. Apologies, that slipped from earlier. So up to 3,500 for Cambridge. So just to remind you of the timetable, the UCAS application deadline is the 15th of October, and it's very much your summer is absolutely being used to prepare for your admissions test, very much kind of through past papers, or if it's STEM subject, absolutely kind of brushing up on knowledge is important. And then interviews are kind of starting to kind of feed through now, so mid-November, and it's when you start to hear, and then that's a very short lead-in time to actually then usually most of the interviews are in the first 2 weeks of December, with the final decisions towards the end of January. Oh yes, so we're deferred entry. I should just perhaps say, if it's a STEM subject, absolutely they, I wouldn't say positively discourage it, but your chances of success, unless you have a very good project you're going on to do, it is kind of lowering your chances. So just be aware of that if it's a STEM subject. If it is a humanities subject, then yes, they would look at it more kind of kindly, particularly if you have already got a nice, interesting plan of what you are going to be doing as part of that. But we would almost suggest that you actually get your really, really strong A-levels first if you are thinking of defining your entry, and then apply in the autumn of your kind of gap year, which maybe isn't the best, most exciting way to spend your gap year on the first part, but it does perhaps increase your chances because you are able to focus on the interview and all the assessments, etc., while not having to worry about all your other A-level subjects. So again, any questions for that part of the talk, or any aspect of the Aim High or competitive entries, please do email at any point. Okay, and finally, medicine, dentistry, and veterinary medicine. So start with medicine and dentistry. So there are three main pillars to the application process. The first is, of course, your academic profile. GCSEs are particularly important. They place a lot of emphasis on GCSEs. However, it does vary from medical school or dental school between them. For example, some medical schools might give 50% of weighting to their GCSE profile, and you have to have a certain number of grades of 7 to 9, for example, whereas others might have more leeway on that. Your kind of need to be predicted grades, A-star, AA to AAB is a kind of minimum, and most of your offers, principally because your offers will be on that. So that's your kind of first pillar. The second pillar is the UCAT. So the UCAT is a specific assessment for medicine and dentistry, usually held just after the summer holidays. So they recommend 6 to 8 weeks preparation time. I'm not going to call it revision time, because again, it's meant to be on more of your cognitive abilities. So 3 parts. One is verbal reasoning, so absolutely being able to kind of elicit information very at speed from a series of kind of texts on completely random subjects. One is situational judgment, so again, seeing what kind of a person with you, are you kind of reasoning, your kind of ethical kind of values, etc. And the third part, I confess I have completely forgotten at the moment, but that is your UCAT. And then your UCAT score, you will know that immediately, but the universities only know it I think in the beginning of November they receive that, and that's when they kind of decide who they're interviewing. But when you get your score, having come out the next day, you are then able to decide which medical schools you can, should be applying to, because again, some medical schools like King's College London, for example, have very high thresholds in terms of UCAT of who they will look at, whereas others such as Keele might be less concerned with the UCAT and might be looking at other aspects. And then the third pillar is your who you are as a person and what work experience you have had. So the work experience, they are far less, they understand that lots of people have difficulty accessing work experience in those particular fields. So they are much more open now to having gained work experience in different opportunities. So volunteering in a care home, for example, being part of the St. John's Ambulance, working in a public facing role, even in a kind of busy cafe, all of those show that you have those kind of public facing skills, and you are able to do the teamwork, the kind of deal with pressure, all of those things which you are absolutely kind of expected to talk about in terms of your interview, whether it's kind of showing empathy, all of those kind of things. So however, of course, if you are able to get the work experience in kind of a healthcare or dental environment, it does naturally give you more, perhaps, oh goodness, I'm so sorry. Apologies again. Does give you more to talk about when you do get to interview and talk about in terms of your personal statement. So those are the kind of 3 different pillars to consider right from now, because finding that work experience and proving that you're a well-rounded person absolutely starts now, and as well as factoring in that next summer, I'm afraid, will be spent preparing for your UCAT. And while we are able to kind of signpost you to resources, because it changes all the time, and it's meant to be testing your cognitive abilities, it's training for it rather than us teaching you. And we can teach you how to approach it, but it's practice makes perfect. Lots of banks of kind of resources available just even on the UCAT website to give you access to the kind of banks of questions to practice. So one of the key things we first do as part of the Health Hub is looking at the healthcare careers, because deciding you want to be a doctor rather than any of the other healthcare professions is incredibly important. Academic skills, but academic record, as I've explained, is important. But also the skills and attributes needed to be a doctor are increasingly kind of weighted. So for example, there are lots of on social media kind of A-star students who've been a head girl, etc., kind of like berated the fact they didn't get any offers for interviews, and it's perhaps because they haven't been they've been very much focused on the academic and ticking those boxes rather than actually understanding what dealing with the public is. So really building that evidence that you have those personality kind of traits and personable qualities is key. So the Health Hub absolutely kind of supports students in understanding how to approach these different aspects of the application. But the Medical Schools Council and the Dental Schools Council have a wealth of resources on the application process, including what, to some extent, each of the medical schools is looking for in terms of its criteria on which it will judge people, both for selection for interview and at interview. Although, of course, each individual school's website, medical school or dental school's website, gives you as much information that they can as well. And it's probably but the Medical Schools Council and Dental Schools Council is a fantastic place to start looking and understanding the different facets of the application process. So veterinary medicine is similar in terms of course, the academic profile, but they do but you don't have to do the UCAT. However, they do put more emphasis on your work experience. And as I see 11 vet schools, I think I can't remember how many medical schools, but this year I think there were 40,000 applicants for medicine and medicine, and I think 1 in 4 will get a place. So again, it just reminds you how competitive, and because there are only 11 vet schools, that's why it's also incredibly competitive. And also your university fees are still only 9,500 or so, plus the maintenance of course costs, but the government and is investing in you as in terms of the cost of the training. So that's why also it's such a rigorous kind of application process. As with medicine and dentistry, biochemistry and biology A-levels are absolutely key. Also, as with chemistry, veterinary and dental, the application deadline is the 15th. The thing that makes it different is that they are very, well, they say they're less so, but they're very specific about having to spend a certain number of hours, and it's quite a substantial number of hours in animal settings to have gained that veterinary experience. So it could be volunteering at your local cattery, it could be helping a local farmer, or working in foaling season in a stables, or even kind of working at stables and mucking out, and as much shadowing of kind of vets or veterinary nurses as possible, because you need to kind of be able to again show that log of how many hours you've done wherever, and we also might be asked, and you might be asked to provide that evidence as well that you have done it in those particular settings. So that's why the kind of logging of your work experience is so important. So because they do say that they do recognize that work experience is difficult to achieve, they do say that they are trying to, or aiming to, make it less important, but unfortunately for the moment, for some schools more than other veterinary schools more than others, it is still very much a requirement. So again, absolutely check the individual veterinary schools for the most up-to-date guidelines. And of course, the Veterinary Schools Council, just like the medical schools and dental schools councils, are just fantastic in terms of the wealth of resources that they have available. The holidays, volunteering, making the most of that extra time is why we're kind of doing this talk now, to absolutely make you understand before it's too late and you don't have time to build up that academic and kind of professional profile is important. And again, the weighting for each college is, each school is kind of slightly different. So that's again why it's important to look at, for this, for example, weighting of offers made after interview. So 60% on academic performance, 25% was on their interview performance relating to science, maths, and 10% on relating to work experience, and then 5% other. So each school will have its own criteria, so it's deciding where your strong points are and making sure that you apply strategically. And if you're applying for medicine or dental or veterinary, you'll hear those terms a lot. Apply strategically is important. And while we would like to know about all, as advisors, the ins and outs of every school, unfortunately, that is slightly kind of a mammoth operation. So doing that yourself is, I can't stress enough how important that is. So again, just to run you through the timeline, Year 12 already begins starting researching medical schools and their entry requirements, start your work experience in volunteering, or kind of effectively working if that's what you need to do, but just trying to prove as much as possible that it's public facing. So the summer, absolutely go to your open days, but beginning to prepare for your UCAT for dental and medicine, and then over the summer writing your medicine personal statement alongside your UCAT. We were slightly more lax this year, thinking no, poor things, they'll still be doing their work experience, they'll still be preparing for their UCAT, and it did mean that people were very behind when they started and needed to get their applications in for that early deadline. So I'm afraid we will be very strict that it needs to be in the first draft by the end of the summer holidays. And then September is your 4 medical schools. I forgot to mention that. 4 medical school or dental or veterinary school choices. And the 5th choice can be a normal kind of university course. So most people in this instance choose biomed as their kind of backup 5th choice, just in case they don't get into any of their medical or dental or veterinary schools. So the college deadline will be the same. UCAS college deadline, early entry 7th of October in order to meet the 15th of October. The autumn will be the interview prep, and then November to March is attending your medical school interviews. So, however, again, it's the grades that count. It's the grades that open the doors to increasing the number of choices of competitive universities that you go to, but of course your UCAT score for medicine and dentistry as well. So thank you for attending, and amazing stamina if you managed to get right to the end, though I hope if you were doing medicine and dentistry or veterinary, you managed to just pick up where you needed to. And please do not hesitate, as I've said before, to get in touch, but consulting your young person's kind of Teams page, if they allow you to get onto it, or looking at our Futures Fortnightly publication, which will have a more limited range of opportunities, is key. But whether a young person or a parent or carer supporting a young person, absolutely focusing on your academic profile right from now is absolutely key, and taking advantage of all the opportunities that are made available to you. So thank you very much for listening.